First of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the fundraising panel. I'm Manaz Cavalluzzi, an audit director at Cerini Associates. With us today, we have three panelists joining us to discuss different aspects of fundraising for nonprofit organizations. And while they introduce themselves, you'll see another question pop up. So you could just please answer that additional polling question, and that'll help target everybody's responses this morning. Christine, do you want to start?
I'd love to. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Deska. I'm the president and co-founder of Nonprofit Sector Strategies and Bell's Board. I actually spent the first 15 or so years of my career working in the nonprofit sector before starting our consulting business. And we focus on predominantly board development and board engagement and board and fundraising. So very, very pertinent to this session. I'm so glad those of you are taking the time to be with us. We know you have a lot of competition in terms of where to spend your time. So thanks for joining us.
Sarah, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Al-Gabashi, and I'm the founder and principal at Bash Advisories. We are a consulting firm that partners with nonprofits and foundations across the country to support their strategic planning, communications, and fundraising. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today and to learn from my fellow panelists. Thank you for joining us.
Darren, go ahead.
Pleasure to meet everyone, and good morning. I'm Darren Porter. I'm the CEO and founder of Powered by Professionals. We're a fundraising and event management firm. We're based here in New York. We do work nationally, and we focus on major fundraising events where we provide support in three key areas of fundraising, which is all about volunteer engagement, honorees, board members, co-chairs, committee members, event management, detailed event logistics, everything from galas to run walks to concerts, and then also back office and technology support for these events. So really like a full service agency to help you expand your event and fundraising events. Looking forward to speaking with all of you and learning from everyone on the call.
For all of our attendees, I just want to encourage everybody to ask follow-up questions in the chat. We'd really love this to be as interactive as possible. We'll try to get to any questions we can. And if we miss your question or it requires a more detailed response, we'll work to get you in touch with the panelists so you can reach out to them personally after the session or after the conference today. So let's dive right in. So our first question is for Darren. When it comes to event planning, how do I start? How do I find an honoree who is committed to fundraising? How do you set a fundraising goal for the honoree? And how do we get people in the room at our fundraising event?
A lot of questions there, so we'll try to break them down into pieces. But when it comes to, how do you plan a fundraising event? How do I start? I think it's very important to really understand your audience. So understanding the supporters you have, making sure you create an initial budget to what are you trying to work within, because you need to understand who are the potential attendees for this, where is the fundraising going to come from, and what is really possible, because you want to make sure you set yourself up for success. So some of those things are critical. It all comes down to the people, but really understanding, does it make sense to have a run walk, a gala, like a cocktail party? Do you want to do something more elaborate or fun because your audience is into something else? So it's really understanding the donor and the supporters. Getting buy-in from them is critical, because without buy-in from them, you're not going to have success. So these are some of the things that I would highly recommend you think about when planning that initial event, or if you have an existing event, even reevaluating, is that the right event for your organization? But you will need to create a budget so you understand how much these things cost and how you want to set it up. When it comes to how do you find an honoree who's committed to fundraising, and how to set a fundraising goal for the honoree, you've got to do your homework. So you need to do your homework prior to approaching anybody. Don't approach somebody without having looked at if they're the right candidate for your organization. Is this somebody who is in a position that can help you? Because if you ask them, if you make it clear to them what you're going to do on that initial ask, that there's a financial responsibility to be honored at our event, then you need to make sure they are in a position to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a very awkward conversation that no one's going to win. So you want to think through. You want to also figure out how they're going to help you before you even get into that conversation, so you can help them understand. They may not understand how they're supposed to do it, and you can explain to them it's not very hard. We're going to help you. We're going to make this easy for you. We're going to show you how to leverage your vendors if you're a big corporate honoree, or to involve your network if you're a very well connected individual in a certain industry. Or if you have or if they personally have wealth, showing them how their gift is going to make a huge impact on your mission. So making sure you've done that homework prior to the conversation, and then going in with a list of ways that they can impact you, but then being very clear of what the expectation is from the beginning. You do not want to approach someone and then, oh, by the way, on the next call, say we have these financial expectations of you and we have these deliverables. So these are things you really got to consider. I think the last part of this question was, and then how do you set that fundraising goal? There's two more questions. If I'm taking too long, someone kick me off, but
Okay.
getting through a lot of questions. How to set up that fundraising goal. You need to figure out what your overall goal is for that event, and then what is a realistic goal for that individual based on the homework you've done in advance of what the expectation can be. And I usually give them a range, and that goal will change depending on who you're approaching. So if you're approaching someone with very large capacity, that number may be much higher. If it's someone else, but you think it's critical to honor them, then you may want to lower that number to something that they're going to feel comfortable with, or not even that's doable. You want them to be successful. And then the last thing is, how do we get people in the room at our fundraising events? It's really all about your volunteers. So it goes back to who's being honored, who's co-chairing, who's on the board, who's in the committee, but putting these people in a position to be successful. So you have to engage the people that are helping you with the event, because they're the ones who are going to drive traffic. Without their engagement, you are not going to have a successful event. That's just the way it works. So we're going to do a lot of social media and everyone's going to show up. That's just not how it works. That's nice, but you need to find the right people to fill the right roles within your organization and within the event. Create roles so that people have responsibilities, and then make it clear to them what you need from them. And that's going to drive participation, attendance, and so on at your event.
Thanks, Darren. A lot of really helpful information there about fundraising events, really starting from the bottom and working your way through the event. Next, we have a question for Christine. How can I get my board engaged in our fundraising strategy? And what do I do when my board members don't want to ask for money?
So for those of you chuckling right now, I'm sure you're all saying, none of my board members want to ask for money. It's just not something they're interested in doing. No kidding, right? It's a very uncomfortable thing for many of us. That said, there is an important role for the board to play in your overall fundraising strategy. So for those of you who didn't hear Judy and Barbara's session earlier, they really talked about the delineation of the overall role of the board of directors as it relates to the executive director and the rest of the organization. Really great session. What that also highlights is the great opportunity for the board to get involved, but how? So just to reference something that Darren pointed out, that's kind of goes to the heart of everything. I'm very grateful my first degree was in communications, because it really all comes down to effective communication. And Darren highlighted the importance of setting expectations and communicating those clearly. So I would really be doing those of you on the call a disservice if I didn't first highlight just the importance of having that roles and responsibilities document to reference for your board, so that every board member, even if they've been serving for quite some time, knows what is expected of them. I'll talk about that more later in terms of overall engagement best practices and board development best practices. But as it relates to fundraising, there is a widely known, or I think it's a frustration shared by many nonprofit leaders. I wish my board would do more. But what does that mean? And as it relates to fundraising, there's this huge untapped resource that exists within the board of directors. but it does not involve asking most board members to directly ask for dollars. It actually involves most board members to be energized and engaged in terms of relationship building, all of the various ways they can support that. You know, Darren alluded to that when it comes to even finding the right honoree. You may have never even asked your board members, do you know someone who could support our next event in this way? Here's what we're looking for, a very pointed ask, right? For those of us who do a lot of networking, we're often putting out broad asks. But whenever we can really hone in on what it is we're looking for, the better. So a couple other examples when it comes to activating your board in your fundraising strategy. And I'm also a big proponent of this really coming from the development directors, the advancement directors, the fundraising leads within your team, right? You don't want the board meddling in all of the weeds. We talked about that earlier. When you have a strong fundraising strategy, you can go to your board members and give them ways based on what you know of them, right? You know your board members pretty well, most of you. You know that Jane would be the one to make a potential corporate sponsorship introduction. That was one of the top responses. Whereas you know Sally might be more inclined to invite someone in for a tour of your facility, invite someone in to experience one of your programs, engage future volunteers. So all of these sort of indirect relationship building tactics really roll up into growing your fundraising strategy. So I know Sarah will probably touch on some strategic planning best practices, but it's really making sure that when you go to your board, you're rolling those relationship building asks directly into your overall fundraising strategy, feeding into your strategic plan goals, right? This should all be moving in alignment. So I hope that gives you some ideas. I just know that when we work with boards, we work with hundreds of organizations now through the support of our board portal platform, right? Which board members are tapping into directly to find resources, to find information. And oftentimes board members have not been asked to contribute in terms of many of these indirect fundraising tactics. And when they hear the word fundraising, it's also about framing. It's about, wait, what am I being asked to do? So consider the different ways you can tap into your board members that are more quote unquote non-threatening, right? How could you bring someone with you to our next mixer? How could you invite a guest to our next gala? Have you reached out to your network? When you introduce yourself, are you including that you serve on our board as part of your introduction in the variety of networks and folks that you tap into? So I'll stop there. As Darren referenced earlier, I was only asked one question and I can talk for this long, but I'll be back.
There are a couple questions in the chat, one of which I think could be relevant now. So somebody wrote, we're focused on identifying donors with more capacity than we're seeing now. Many times they ask about existing support from the board. Is the board contribution line on our P&L the best way to demonstrate this? So for that last part, I would think that if you have that separately identified on your P&L as your board contributions, that would show their monetary contribution to the organization. But there are all these other factors that you just mentioned right now, Christine, the board engagement and involvement in the organization, events and things like that. Is there anything else you want to really highlight there or add to it?
I would just say that it's a much bigger picture you should be looking at rather than the direct contributions of board members. Yes, that is important, and I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit more. So, I mean, it's a terminology I like, and I know Barbara and Judy, I think, like as well, as a personally significant contribution. But that's why we're always talking about the give and the get, right? And I like to really focus on all of the opportunities around the getting aspect of it, while also being cognizant that it is important to have 100% participation, bar none. But there's so much more to that story. So I would just, I guess I'll see if Sarah or Darren want to weigh in, but the impact reports your organization puts out, the important infographics should tell the story of all of the facets of giving, not just direct board member giving. It's important, but it's one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Darren, is there anything you'd like to add about board engagement in the fundraising strategy and board members not wanting to ask for money from an event perspective?
That's open. Yeah, well, I agree with everything Christine said. It was very well said. I would say that it's important that you have a financial responsibility for each of your board members. So you have an onboarding process that involves here are the things that every board member is responsible for, and here is the financial responsibility, give or get. of each board member. And that's something I wouldn't have a problem sharing with somebody that I'm talking to. There are definitely some that are afraid, but they're more afraid because they've never done it before. They don't really understand how it works. So I think it falls back on the organization and or the company assisting to show someone how to do it. Because it's very overwhelming for someone who's not kind of programmed like that. They just don't understand what to do. And then it becomes, I can't do it because they don't understand it. So it's not that they don't want to even do it. They just don't know what to do. If you show them what to do, they might be more open to doing that. And it's a longer conversation than we have for this, but happy to answer it. Happy to have a 15-minute call with anyone on here to kind of walk through some of that, those ideas. And we've posted some blogs as well that might have those answers as well.
Yeah. Another question from the chat. How long in advance, realistically, would an organization need to plan their first in-person fundraiser? Is there sort of like a general rule of thumb there, or does it depend?
Yeah, I mean, I think 6 months is a good number to throw out there. More time is better. Has it been done in less? It has. But 6 months is probably a number you can pull off, and it'll still have some success. But it depends on what every organization is in a different place, and what pieces do you have available. Is the board going to participate? How big is your list? How big of an event do you want to do? Where is it happening? There's 100 questions that go along with it. But if I had to give a 2-second answer, I would say 6 months, kind of your minimum approach to something like that. 9 months better for something new.
Thanks, Sarah. Sarah, a question for you. How, as a nonprofit, would I connect with foundations that are invite only, and how can I find new grant opportunities?
Great question. Thank you. I'll start with the second part of this question. I always think that the best place to find prospects for your organization is to start with your peers. Take a look at who's funding them, because that means that funder is not only already invested in this line of work, but they're also invested in the geographic area that you're in. And so I would start there by looking at who's on their annual report that's been giving to them, who's been supporting some of their programs. From there, I would expand to organizations that are tangential to the work that we do. So if you're an education provider, think about who's doing advocacy in this space and who's providing the support for that advocacy work. I also know that, beyond that, there are a number of databases out there that provide this kind of information. One of my favorites is Inside Philanthropy, because not only are you able to find the organizations that are supporting the work, but it has a people finder function, so you can get the program officers' email contacts from there as well. And it allows you to then be able to reach out to them, which is a segue into the second part of this conversation about how you connect with foundations. And it goes back to what Christine was saying earlier about the importance of communication. Program officers want to give money away. It is a part of their job. It's not that when you reach out to them that they don't want to support the work that you do. It's about how you engage them in supporting that work. And so if a foundation is invite only, I recommend reaching out to a program officer with a short email that demonstrates that you've done your research. So you align your work with their priorities, and you talk about the impact of your work as well, aligning it with the way they talk about the impact of their strategy. I recommend keeping those emails very short, because program officers are inundated with emails, and using a strategic attachment, whether that's a case deck or a one-pager that is focused on the impact of your work. Again, I think that we forget there are a lot of amazing organizations doing very similar work to us. So what differentiates us from those organizations is how we move the needle on solving problems in our community. And so all of your communication, not just to program officers, but to your individual donors as well, should be focused on that impact piece. That's the piece that's most inspiring to people. They know you're doing great work. They want to know how it's changing people's lives. And that's what motivates them to want to be a part of the work in the long term.
Thanks, Sarah. Christine, here's a question for you. What should the board's role be in the capital campaign? And can you share some top board development and engagement tips?
Sure. Thanks, Manas. Great question. We hear more and more organizations we work with embarking on capital campaigns. It's a really exciting time. it's a great opportunity to engage the board for the entirety of the process. And so starting at the beginning, it's the opportunity to reinforce your strategic goals. You know, the organizations that are most effective, they have a strategic planning committee that maintains an active schedule, whether it's quarterly or biannually. At least they're touching base on where are we with our strategic goals, and then it comes to the board to approve that budget for the capital campaign. So just to touch briefly on the 3 phases of a capital campaign and how you can engage your board. And oh, by the way, I did write a blog for Blackbaud on this specific topic. It's really comprehensive because they required at least 1,500 words. So it's all in the resources that Kellyanne is sharing if you need to really dig in on this, or if you're contemplating starting a capital campaign. But when it comes to the 3 phases, most of us are familiar, right? You have your planning phase. And during this, I mean, could there be any better opportunity to have those one-on-one meetings with your board members if you haven't had them in years? I mean, you get to really have what's called typically a feasibility study, where you have to interact with each board member and really figure out their ability to contribute and take part in your capital campaign, right? Such valuable information can be gained during that planning phase. And then when you get into your quiet phase, the second part of your capital campaign, this is where you can really tap into your board members for many of the indirect fundraising tactics I mentioned earlier. You know, what introduction would be helpful? You know, if we're building a new facility, you know, who in your network would be excited or passionate about our particular mission and how this campaign is going to take us to the next level? It's when all of that communication and messaging is being formulated, and board members might have access to great connections to maximize your reach and maximize your network. You're also, you know, during this phase, figuring out that overall gift range of your network, right? This is a huge undertaking. And then finally, when you get to that public phase, and if you're thinking of having a separate kickoff event or embedding your capital campaign launch into an existing event, of course, this is where you can go back to your board members for those continued introductions or growing the existing introductions when it comes to where are we having this event, who wants to be at the forefront of our event, right? This is where corporate social responsibility should be shining. You should have corporations really understanding how big of an impact you're going to have when you meet or hopefully exceed your capital campaign goals. You know, the ballpark figures is 20 to 50% board participation in a capital campaign. They really need to emphasize that that's critical. And if a member isn't quite on board with that, for lack of a better term, then it's time to potentially reevaluate the position, because this is a time when you need full buy-in, right? This is such a pivotal moment for your organization. And I'll wrap up by saying, in terms of, I guess I'll get into the second question, but give me the hook, Manas, if this is too much. But best practices, right? You need a central location for all of your information during this capital campaign process. This is a time when you are in constant communication with all of your stakeholders who are involved, but particularly your board. You know, they should be kept up to speed. So they should know where to find all of the information about your campaign. This is an opportunity to leverage your fundraising software. Hopefully well in advance, you recognize whether or not you have effective software in place, or whether you need to adopt software if you don't have something to manage your donors and all of those relationships in a really structured manner. And then finally, progress tracking, right? We should all be on the same page with how we're doing in terms of our goal, constantly reinforcing, we're here, our goal is X, we're making progress. So the board feels part of this and in alignment, very similar to your overall strategic plan goals, right? Really all of us being on the same page with growth. And then back to Manas's first question around just a few really important board engagement best practices. We spoke about the roles and responsibilities, whether it's a checklist or something board members sign, but the key is consistency with that. If you have that, like a plan that sits on the shelf, you have that and you don't reference it, what good is it? Take the time to make sure that document is working for you. That really highlights the full comprehensive nature of what you want your board members to be involved with throughout the year. And I'm happy to share a sample, actually another resource links to a sample template of this. I'll just give you a quick 3 more. Mission moments, right? Can you integrate a mission moment agenda item into various meetings throughout the year? Maybe not every meeting. I know these meetings are tight, but When you get out of that rote sort of I and no and all of the things that boards members have to weigh in on, and you have a moment for someone to share how the mission has impacted them or how they have been able to volunteer in a certain way, you get that engagement back. You don't go to a board meeting and come out with not really recognizing the impact and why you're serving. Thirdly, a board trio or board buddy system. So simple, right? But I always say when you join a new team, you walk onto the team and if nobody says hello to you, if nobody, welcomes you, if you don't feel belonging, right? And that's a bigger issue when we talk about employee engagement, but if you don't feel like you belong, it's the same thing with the board. And it's harder if it's virtual still, but many are thankfully back in person. But assign a board buddy to a new member, or even if you have a long serving board, set up board trios. There's science behind meeting in groups of 3 and how you get to know one another. Literally have a 15-minute Zoom. Hopefully folks will do it. You're putting it out there, ways to show up for your team. And yes, I'm a big sports person. So for me, it's, I know my soccer team is counting on me. So yes, I'll play a game at 9:50 p.m. tonight, because I know I'll hear it if I don't show up. And finally, annual board retreat. I know if you're an under-resourced organization, most are, you say, I don't know if we can afford this. You can do a morning session, you can do a breakfast, you can have an internal facilitator, you can do this with minimal resources, but having that separate space for board members to grow the relationships among one another, and again, get reinforcement and reacclimated to the strategic goals is time well spent, bar none. Pretty much even the naysayers leave a board retreat, well, especially if I facilitate it, they leave the board retreat happy, engaged, and grateful they had that time to spend with one another. So just think about a morning session if you haven't had a board retreat yet.
Thanks, Christine. Sarah, in relation to these capital campaigns, how can an organization write grants or find additional funding?
It's a great question. I always recommend starting with the people who are already invested in your mission and thinking through what would a bigger engagement with them look like, not discounting the annual support that they already provide because you want to make sure that you're maintaining that as well. But these are people that already care about the work. So what would it mean to message to them the transformational change that would happen in your community as a result of a larger engagement with them over X period of years? And that doesn't just mean the people who are already a part of your network, but who has lapsed, right? What are the grants that have timed out? How do you bring those funders back? Then I would think about the funders that you've had conversations with where it maybe hasn't landed in terms of an annual gift, but something bigger and more transformational could land as an opportunity for them to see themselves as a part of a short-term engagement with you that would have a big impact on your community. And as you're doing this, it's really important to remember that, again, I feel like all 3 of us have been harping on impact, but the impact piece is so important, and it's why we keep bringing it up. From my experience, I've seen that when folks are trying to engage donors and funders around a capital campaign, a lot of the messaging tends to focus on what the organization is going to gain. And we want to switch that messaging to what the community is going to gain, right? So how are we talking about the change that we're creating constantly and demonstrating that we've already had this type of change, but a larger investment could really transform the way we serve people. It would help us do this piece that we haven't been able to do or expand in this area because we've seen additional need. But we want to keep that conversation focused on what the big impact is going to be, because that's really where you're going to see some of those larger funders that you haven't been able to engage potentially for the gift sizes that you want come in and see this as an opportunity to help create that change with you.
Thanks for that. So with donor dollars down and no more PPP funds available, what advice do you have regarding grants, and how can an organization differentiate themselves from other applicants?
Not to talk about impact again, but for the second piece of this, that is how you differentiate yourself from other applicants, right? You talk about the type of change that you're creating. And, I think the tried and true thing is to talk about, what's the one unique aspect that maybe some of the other peer organizations in your community haven't touched on. Are you the largest? Are you the only? Whatever it is that kind of differentiates you from it. But the other thing that I would say in response to this question about grant dollars being down is I want people to think about foundations as short-term funding. what you really should be investing in is mobilizing individuals to be a part of your work. Foundations are constantly changing their strategies every 5 years or so. There's the new hot thing in education. There's the new hot thing to save democracy. And so, that type of funding should be focused on like, what is the bridge that you need to establish much deeper relationships with the individuals in your community who could be a part of this work? And how do you better engage those individuals? How do you bring them more closely into the organization? How do you bring them behind the scenes of how the sausage gets made, right? Like you want to demonstrate to people that they're a partner in the work. And that's true for foundations as well. Like, how do you demonstrate to them that you're problem solving together and that every single person that's involved in the mission of an organization is helping to achieve that end goal that we're all hoping for?
Thanks, Sarah. And over the next 10 to 20 years, we'll be seeing the largest level of wealth transference this country has ever seen, with an anticipated 11 to 12 trillion dollars finding its way to charities. What strategies should nonprofits take to make sure that they have a seat at the table when these funds switch hands?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you want to think through, how are you not just focused on your biggest major donors in the moment, but how are you thinking about what the next generation of major donors and individuals could be at your organization? Even if they're not giving the big dollars now, at some point, they will reach a stage in their professional career where they have more disposable funds. And so you want to make sure that they're heavily invested in your work from the start, so that when that opportunity arises, they already feel like they are so closely tied to your mission and your organization that they want to do more. So create volunteer opportunities for them, create event opportunities for them to see the work behind the scenes or get to know your community more intimately. One of the things that I always find really interesting about when we do community listening for strategic plans, organizations always want us to interact with the participants of their work, but they don't think about their donors as a part of that community listening. What are they seeing as some of the solutions that could be deployed? What are the ways that they think that this work has been successful or hasn't been successful? They live in your community. They're a part of the community listening exercise. So I think it's important to think about the ways that you're engaging not just your biggest donors, but all of your donors, and how you're demonstrating to them that they are a part of the mission and creating those personal connections. And I would love to hear from Christine and Darren what their advice is as well.
Well, I'll just jump in and say, I agree with everything Sarah just mentioned, and it's such good guidance. And just to add to that, it's important to think similarly when it comes to your board, who's in your governance pipeline, that we call it sometimes, right? How are you setting up a structure? When I even say, who's going to be on your board in the next 5, 10, 15 years from now? I get a kind of like deer in headlights from a lot of organizations. So it's important to consider what sort of structures you could put in place to ensure that you have this buy-in from the next generation of leaders. Are you creating a social sharing mechanism for folks to get involved? I know that it was something like 38% of you listening now are interested in getting more small dollar donations. Right? I just wrote a blog about Gen Zers, and the oldest Gen Zer now is 27 years old. But you know what? Some of these folks are launching into the workforce and ready to get bombarded on Instagram with a variety of messages. And is yours going to be the one that resonates? And if it does, I mean, I consider myself part of the lazy group that does recurring donations or recurring payments, right? You get someone giving in a recurring fashion and you keep that impact story going, you have the potential to engage someone for decades. So the point I tried to convey in what I wrote recently was really, look, we know many of you do not have the capacity for a separate strategy for a younger cadre of engagement. However, what tweaks could you make in your existing marketing, your existing outreach that doesn't leave this generation out, right? Are you giving it just a little bit of extra thought to round out your strategy? Or if you do have the capacity, is it the right time to consider a junior board or an advisory group or a young adult something or other, just to ensure that you have this engagement? And so there's a lot to kind of consider there in terms of capacity and resources, but a lot to be lost if you're not engaging with other generations as your board members are aging.
Yeah, and that's great, Christine and Sarah. I think they both covered pretty much everything. The only thing I would add that maybe ties back to your events that would make some sense, create these events, there are opportunities to give people roles. I know I said this a few times, but there could be this dream team, there could be this new leadership group, there could be a young professionals group, there could be all these different roles tied to the event where you can engage some of these new individuals and or older individuals that have been around for a while and make them feel a part of it. And then those over time can turn back into board members, people who become active in different programs that you have at your organization, because you just want to figure out how to engage them in some capacity. The event is usually the easiest way in with somebody, and then you can move them into a bigger role within your organization. And then with this influx of money that's going to happen over the X amount of years, there'll be opportunities for bigger gifts that you just by having them involved, you would never have if you'd not engaged them in the ways that were discussed here.
So there's a question in the chat that refers to a junior board. It says, we just started a junior board. Do you have any resources that are specific to maximizing the impact of a junior board?
Oh, sure. I guess just generally speaking, and thanks for the question, I would say it goes back to that roles and responsibilities document right off the bat. If you don't have job descriptions or role descriptions, do these folks know what is expected to them? I've seen oftentimes it's, yeah, we show up for, networking events every quarter. What else could they be doing, right? Are you actively asking them to maximize their social media network? Are you actively asking them to make an introduction? So we can talk more. Anyone who's listening, feel free. I know all of us are open to chatting one-on-one after this as schedules allow. So I'd love to talk with you more, but congrats on starting a junior board. That's a big feat in and of itself. I know it can feel intimidating to have yet another body to manage. So kudos to you, and I'm happy to talk more about that. And just to highlight something, go ahead, Darren.
Just one thing on the junior board is that, whoever the leaders are of that junior board, give them the resources they need, because if you get someone to really buy in and they're excited and they're so excited you gave them a chance to be the leader of this junior board, one or two or three people, that they are going to be so engaged and their energy will feed to the other people and they'll get new people involved. So that's what I did in the beginning. I was the head of a young professionals committee in my early 20s, and I ran it for 10 or 13 years, whatever it was. And that's why I do what I do for a living. I got so passionate about it. So I think giving the people, making them feel really important, inviting them to serve, one of them to serve on your board. So they head the junior board and they serve on your board. Even if they don't say a lot, they sit in, make them feel important.
Yeah, and that I was going to reinforce Darren's other point about creating roles for folks. And if Darren's highlighting this again, when someone takes on a role, they immediately feel more buy-in and a sense of purpose. And we all look for that in all aspects of our lives, right? So when it comes to overall board development, ensure that everyone is on at least one committee when they join, right? That should be on your roles and responsibilities list, one committee. And to Darren's point, yes, if you have this contagious personality, this contagious passion leading your junior board, I mean, how much more likely are you to find success? And if you don't have that, look for other roles in that leadership of the junior board to fill that piece, because the messaging and the ability to communicate among networks would really plays a huge part in how successful your board will be.
So we have a few minutes left. If anybody wants to ask any other questions in the chat while people respond there for all of our panelists, what final tips would you like to leave everyone with?
I'll go first. My tip would be to have fun with the way you do this work. Think about what fun communication could look like to your donor base, to your board, what could be really exciting and interesting and funny to send out to folks. Don't forget to let your personality shine through when you're building relationships with program officers or with major donors. This work could be really hard and it's very stressful. And so remembering to have fun as you're doing it makes it more exciting and makes it feel like something that you want to do in the long term to avoid that burnout that some of us feel in fundraising.
Thanks, Sarah. Darren, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't be afraid to ask. So I think, at times we're sometimes afraid to approach people who are involved, and, they're involved for a reason. So don't be shy. If they don't want to be engaged, then maybe they're not the right person for your organization. So ask Maybe how you ask is something you can be, you can craft properly, but do not be afraid to ask. And then anyone who is really gung-ho and has stepped up, make them feel like $1,000,000. That's, I think those are some little things that if you do those things, you're going to go a long way.
And I guess what I would leave you all with is a lot comes down to framing and communication. I'd say approach your board members as relationship builders rather than fundraisers. Fundraising is very intimidating. Asking for money is intimidating for a lot of people. However, the ask for things like inviting someone in for a tour, sending a thank you note, inviting a friend to a gala, et cetera, are much more low pressure and can really set up the engagement pipeline in many different contexts.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We have a couple minutes left, so there is one question in the chat that I'll pose. Apart from impact communication, any tips on encouraging someone to commit to recurring donations?
To double down on what Darren just said, ask. If you want recurring donations, ask for recurring donations. Create the ask email or the campaign that's focused on what a recurring gift will do for your organization and what it means for the sustainability of your work moving forward. Framing it within that recurring donation space helps people think, oh, I didn't remember that was an option before. I'll do that now. And to what Christine was saying earlier, like I'm one of those people that makes recurring donations as well. And it is a tried and true tactic that I forget to cancel things all the time. And I would never cancel a recurring donation at this point. So it is really smart to think through at what point in the year could you turn one of your campaigns or an appeal into something that is specifically about recurring donations.
Yeah, make it fun, and then make it easy. Make it fun and easy. Those are two other, you got to come up with something catchy, and then it's one click and they're all set up, as opposed to them trying to navigate through to find it.
And I'll just shout out to the folks at Feeding Westchester who hosted an amazing session specifically on recurring donation strategy at the AFP conference a couple of weeks ago in New York City. I plan to reach out to the leadership there because they showed marked charts to demonstrate offering recurring donations in an effective way using their technologies. They tapped into a few different platforms. The increase in donations has your mouth would hang open seeing what they were able to show over the years because, like Darren just mentioned, they made it easy to give in a recurring fashion.
Thank you all so much for your insight and your input today and joining us. Christine, Sarah, Darren, I really appreciate you taking the time to help us through this. Thank you to all the attendees for chiming in. The questions were great and there was a lot of engagement. The next sessions are the accounting update and the IT, cyber, and AI update. So there's going to be 2 sessions. You can choose which one you'd like to join.
Everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for having us. Thanks for listening.
Everyone.